Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, editor Robert Grigsby Wilson, joins us to talk about his work on the 40-year-old version. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode, so make yourself comfortable as we jump into the conversation with Rob. Hello to my namesake, Rob. How are you today?
I'm just fine, Bobby. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for
Great.
joining me today. And we're going to be talking about your work on the 40-year-old version. I have to say that in a specific way so that people don't mistake it for the Steve Carell film, as most people in the office have when they question what I'm watching over the weekend.
I still am a little surprised that we made it out into the world with that film title because, I just thought that at some point somebody would present some sort of clearance issue or something like that. I'm not a lawyer and it was never my job, but I was always just like, wow, that's going to be an interesting discussion with distributors and whomever about that. And I always thought a little bit of a hurdle to clear. And then in the script, the climax of the film always just had like sick rhymes when she jumps up on stage and says, makes her speech. And so I know Rada and I know she's a great lyricist. And so I just trusted whatever that was going to be. And then the first week of dailies come back and I'm looking at the footage and she comes up and in a real tight close-up direct to camera says like FYOV, not telling the truth makes sense to me, like immediately names the title in the climax of the film. And I was just like, well, I guess we're not changing the name of the movie. Like, that is just kind of it. So that it immediately just kind of like at that point, it's a great title and it has so many layers to the use of the name as like a remix of life and the sort of the way it's in keeping with the metaphor of the film or the themes of the film, like made total sense. But I always wanted it for, and like I guess what I've been saying is that like the whole journey is like a story both in making of the film, the story of the film in the film, and the story of making the film is a woman just basically saying, I'm going to do what I want, everybody else be damned. I'm just going to make the film that I want to make. And that's what she did. And that's just like another example of like her deciding that it's what was right for the movie. And I think she's right. And to some degree, like the fact that no one forgot that the movie is a play on the 40-year-old virgin, right? Like, no, you don't forget that is the name of the movie, right? You might get confused from what you heard, right? If you hadn't heard of the film, but no one's going to forget about this movie. Oh, there's a movie called 40-year-old virgin, like because everyone knows about the Judd Apatow movie, right? So that like immediately helps generate buzz about the film. So
It's just a good way of sort of you prickle people's ears, and then because there is already that there's a property out there with something similar name, so then when people correct you, you correct them back, and then you introduce them to something completely new.
absolutely.
But so am I right in thinking / I kind of read and heard this somewhere that your journey on this film began in 2017 when you
Yeah.
worked in the director's lab?
Yeah.
What is a director's lab and how did that meet sort of go down?
Well, so the Sundance Institute, which is sort of the sister umbrella organization to the Sundance Film Festival, I think it may even be the parent organization, I get confused now, runs a series of labs for varying goals to try and promote different kinds of filmmakers and different kinds of films in the industry. And the sort of poster child sort of the granddaddy of the Sundance Directors Labs, of the Sundance Labs, is the Sundance Directors Lab, which has helped cultivate some of the best directing voices in cinema of the past 30 years, in my opinion. You know, Paul Thomas Anderson went through the labs, Quentin Tarantino went through the labs, and then more recently, like Ryan Coogler went through the labs, Dee Reese went through the labs. You know, the list goes on and on. David Lowery went through some of the labs, not the directors' labs, I believe, but like different labs. And then also they have documentary filmmaking labs. They have labs for indigenous filmmakers. They have labs for TV shows. But you know, we're talking about the feature, the narrative directing labs. So the directing labs are a simulated production environment, I guess would be the simplest way to put it. So they invite directors who have feature-length scripts, who have never made a feature film before, to the Sundance Resort in Utah. And it's an attempt to basically give them an opportunity to test out their vision using crew and talent, and to test out their approach and sort of have it evaluated both by the Sundance Institute team, but then also by these teams of creative advisors who come out. So you could count everyone. All of these people come through. It's established cinematographers, directors, writers, editors. Like when I was there, like Octavia Spencer was there. Dean Parasow, who just directed Bill and Ted Face the Music, was a creative advisor. Like, to basically come through and like watch you work. And what the labs provide you with as a director is a DP, a production designer, actors, and an editor. And you go out and try to shoot it. I mean, it's practice. It's never makes it into the film, but you try to see how it goes, and you test out your vision, you test out your approach. And it's an opportunity for directors who've never sort of worked under the traditional production confines before to just like test out communicating their vision, and also just like see how it executes, try and translate it into a real experiment, so that then when you leave the labs, you actually have like tried it before, and you gain confidence and you gain experience, and the results speak for themselves. And so I was brought out by the labs to be one of the editors there. You have no visibility into how and why you get paired up with these directors. But Rada and I guess, seem like a good match on paper. I have a background in music videos and as a musician, and we have a lot of the same influences. I worked, I had made comedy films before that, and I think they just thought maybe I was a good fit. This is all total conjecture on my part. But I was, in some ways, just assigned to Rada by the team. And I read through her script, and I thought it was one of the best scripts I've ever read. And I was like, this woman, and I watched some of her videos online, and I was like, she's hilarious. She has great stage presence. This is going to be amazing. And like, we just got to talking. And on day one, I think we just kind of immediately clicked about her taste in cinema, our taste for like old, like golden era 90s hip hop things. We just clicked on a lot of levels. And, you know, I'm really thankful that she thought that collaboration was strong enough to carry forth to making the film.
It's funny how it's just a sort of by accident you've been paired together and then created magic. It's quite interesting to hear how like the Sundance Lab comes about and how you're basically pre-making the film, and just sort of getting a feel of understanding it.
I mean, Ryan Coogler had, just 2 seconds on that, like Ryan Coogler worked on Fruitvale there. A lot of films recently, Beast of the Southern Wild is another Labs film, you know, Ben Zeitlin's film. And like a lot of the pedigree and the experience that comes from that lab is, I can't say enough good things about. It speaks for itself.
And also hearing who sort of pops in to help out. And you mentioned like Octavia Spencer, and it's just like, wow. I'm not, even if you have work, I don't know how you wouldn't be starstruck or sort of slightly taken aback by being there.
Well, I didn't even mention that, like, that Bob Robert Redford is floating around the whole time, popping in and out, talking to people, having conversations, like sort of sitting at the same table. And it is hard to not feel like you're at camp, like you're at some sort of like weird film camp up in the woods, because you're at this, like you're sort of isolated. You know what I mean? You don't have a car. We're all plucked out of major cities and stuff like that, and sort of stuck on the side of this hill. And so it feels very isolating and like kumbaya, but then it's also like, oh yeah, there's like Robert Redford and Ed Harris like having a casual conversation like down like the next table over, and it's all very low key. Like it's wild. To buy Ed Harris a drink at the bar is a wild experience.
Yeah, I'm just picturing him standing at the bar all night waiting for people to buy him drinks, like a queue of people.
I don't want to speak for him, but if I were him, that's what I would do.
I think I'd probably do the same as well.
Yeah.
Whilst working on a film like the 40-year-old version, what is your pre-production process like? Where does that start, and how do you prepare going into the film?
The biggest piece of preparation that went into getting ready to cut the movie was preparing for the production elements that were going to come into play. Specifically, black and white 35 millimeter was something that a lot of the team had never done before. It was something we all felt good about, and we were all behind Radha's vision, but wanted to make sure we weren't going to screw this up, because it was a low budget film and we didn't have a lot of opportunities to get a do-over. And with film, you're dealing with a very real, very tactile, very living, piece of media. And so we needed to be as prepared as possible going into it. So I spent a lot of time talking to different people, talking to different editors, talking to different workflow people, trying to make sure that we were taking the right approach to our post-production process, to make sure that we did it right, and we did it at a budget friendly level. We sort of had a circuitous route making the film, like sort of getting the film shot so that we could edit it, because at the time Spielberg was in New York making West Side Story and had basically monopolized Technicolor's lab. And we didn't have the money to make Technicolor go and like give us a black and white processing bath for our film. So we had to find a new lab. We found this good lab in Maryland called Color Lab. They did a great job for us, but it basically created a whole other host of technical challenges, because they wouldn't scan the film. We would overnight the film from New York to Baltimore, where the film would be processed and developed. Then the film would get overnight shipped back to New York to Metropolis Post in Manhattan, where the film would get scanned and turned into 2K ProRes masters. And then when that was done, the film would be brought down to Goldcrest Post, where we were cutting, and the film would be synced to our audio, and our dailies would get created, and we could get to work on them. Now, that was like a minimum 3-day turnaround. And so what we had to do was hire a person to be on set to hook up a tap to the DP's camera lens, so that we could get a grainy, dark, low resolution image out of the viewfinder, recorded as ProRes proxy dailies, where we could then those would be handed over to editorial the next morning. And so I would have something to shoot with something to cut with the next day, because it would be like 4 days later when the footage would actually land at my desk for me to actually see what the film looked like. So I had to basically cut the entire film with these grainy, like low resolution, out of focus images, and that had like the 239 matte and the crosshairs in the middle of it burned into the image. So like I had very little to go on when I was trying to judge performance. And I mean, it was just with time being short. I mean, we didn't wrap until after Labor Day, which it makes it for a very tight Sundance submission deadline. You know, fortunately, it all came out. But like, that's sort of a long story. I hope it gets at your question, but it was like it designing that and orchestrating that all had to happen in advance, because once day one of shooting happened, whew, like we were off to the races.
Mentoring the sort of workflow and shooting on the 35mm, and that has led to my next question, about which you kind of answered a bit when posing. You kind of answered my question, which would be what sort of problems occurred during the editing process. And it looks like it was a very long-winded process to get everything developed. How difficult was it for you to sort of edit the pre-developed stuff? And how difficult was it to then overlap it with the film that had been developed?
Without getting too technical, it was basically like prepping and in some ways cutting the film twice, because there are certain nuances to 35mm that just aren't going to appear on some low-fi video tap footage that comes through. Like the exposure, the little details that come through the texture of the film, like are just not apparent when I was cutting the film. So I essentially had to review the dailies all over again once the film footage came in. Fortunately, I had this great assistant editor, Sam Salvadon, who helped me immensely making the process. He went through the film and overcut frame for frame every decision I had made through the process of cutting the tap dailies with the film dailies. So I was able to go back and review all the decisions I had made again, and he would alert me to anything that would come up through the production process. He would say if there was a scratch on the film or something was more out of focus than it looked or something like that. Like, we really had to get it right. And, you know, with the delay in film dailies, we had to basically start editing before we had even seen all the film dailies. Rada was itching to go, and we had to get to work because of our Sundance submission deadline. And so very quickly, fortunately, some of it was for the end of the film. So what I basically said is like, let's start at the beginning, and hopefully by the time we get to the end, we have the film dailies. And, you know, I think we ran into several headaches just with, you know, little things that just happen through the production process when you're dealing with something like alive like that, you know, exposure and scratches and things like that. But all of it, I think, felt so like raw and like enhanced so much the texture of the film that to a large extent we would see these like imperfections, and it felt like the raw kind of cinema that Rada was trying to present. I mean, part of her decision in making the film is that, you know, throughout the history of cinema, like, you've seen a lot of faces presented in 35mm black and white, perfections be damned, but generally speaking, they're all like white, pretty faces. They're the faces of, you know, privileged white men, and Rada wanted to present the New York that she knew and the types of people that she knew that were her New York experience, and present them in the same way. And so to some degree, you know, we looked at those imperfections and we said, the audience is going to look at these imperfections and say, they really did it. They really shot it on film. Like, because there's no escaping some of the things that came up through the process of making it. And so when you see it up on screen, you know that it's real, that we really shot it that way. It's not recreated. It's not teased. It's not impersonated. Like, it's real 35mm black and white. And these are the real people. We went to the Bronx. We went to Brownsville. We went to the far reaches of New York City, to all the places that Rada knows, and like went to the neighborhood where Rada grew up. We saw the challenges and the imperfections that came along with the journey as part of the experience, as I guess you would say. Like we wanted that, and that made it an adventure, but it made it really fun and made it really exciting.
I've worked with 35mm film before, and I was loading it, and it is absolutely nerve-wracking, because like one little slip and it's done, and then like to do a whole film on it, and then it's also in black and white. Yeah, it's like an art in itself that someone has to perfect, and it does show in the film as well that you can see like not the graininess, but you can see the sort of film stock used, and it paints New York in such a different way. Especially, you'd think for this sort of subject matter of a film, you would expect it to be in color, bright, make everything sort of look not idyllic, but I don't know,
shiny.
Shiny,
like
basically.
Really shiny. Yeah.
And there's not many films that are in black and white and being made now in black and white, so it does make it a lot more unique.
Yeah. What's funny is this is not necessarily what our conversation is, but just prior to working on Radha's movie, I had been also working on the editorial team for The Lighthouse, Rob Eggers' movie, and dealing with a lot of the same issues and circumstances leading into it. And I basically spent my entire 2019 in black and white 35mm, which is like, who does that? What is going on? So it feels sort of strange to say, but like, yeah, I mean, we were pushing the boundaries of modern technology with an ancient technology.
Like basically doing a throwback and showing the kids how it used to be done.
Yeah.
Which is great. And I think with the Lighthouse, they used a special kind of stock that no one could process, and they had to do it process it in a bathtub or something, didn't they?
Yeah.
Something along those lines, which is again.
It was also a bit of a mess. Fortunately, they had a A24 behind them, so they were well capitalized. But yes, that like it allowed room for them to really push the envelope in terms of processing and shooting also. But yeah, it's fun.
It's great. Like, it's nice to see. It's a change of pace, and it's nice to see black and white still being used to great effect. Would like to go back to when you're answering earlier about having a musical background and cutting music videos beforehand. How important was that background when it came to cutting the film?
Well, I think it helped prepare me from a discipline perspective in terms of understanding different tricks to repeat verses or make sure to utilize different parts of the footage and different parts of the song. It also gave me a good, sort of like switch to flip, so that when, we transition from a lot of the film, which is long single take moments where the camera is sort of following Radha, languid moments, when she switches into Rodimus Prime, like let's say like in the poverty porn scene, we needed to find a way to enhance the story and communicate to the audience that like everything was kind of changing, and having cut different music videos, deal with different multi-camera projects, like it was really exciting to be able to put on a different hat and like try a different approach to making the film. And we really experimented with that scene a lot of different ways. And I think also coming from like playing in lots of bands, and like I used to gig around LA when I lived there, and having a good background in rhythm and a beat really gave me a lot of like a good foundation to build on, because I think it's really important to, editing is a sort of intrinsically rhythmic art, right? And I think especially when it comes to something like this, which is so music heavy, having that to fall back on as well was like really important.
There's another thing that I noticed as well, where the human moment sort of slows the film down. It is played out on screen, and then when it snaps back to more musical moments, the cutting's just completely different. It's fast paced. The song and the kinetic energy sort of collide, and it's a really cool sort of mishmash of what's being portrayed on screen.
Thank you.
But then what's great as well is when it does have those slower moments, and it shows those human moments. How do you create that pace and know that you need to slow it down but make it like hard hitting?
In some ways, when you're kind of married to the production process, that is to say, like, you're cutting the first day's dailies on day one of shooting, and you're not cutting it in script order, it grants you a certain freedom because you're not focused at all on where we are coming from or where we're going to in the story. You're just asked to live with the footage that you've received for that scene and respond to it however you see fit. And like, one of the things that I think Radha and I connected with early on in 2017 is like her urge not to cut and her urge to present scenes in static frames or in long takes. I mean, I remember the first time, we were getting to know each other, she showed me a scene from Annie Hall, I believe, that was just one long take on a sidewalk. And that was like her inspiration for, her approach to cinematic storytelling. And she said, like, I've come out of the theater, I'm very like comfortable just letting my actors work. And I was like, great. So like, I don't have to do anything, cut off the action in the cut and, go break for lunch. But I think, I knew that was part of her taste. And so I gave myself room to try and sit in the footage as long as possible. And when I tried to cut, when we made the decision to cut, when we made the decision to make a visible edit, I tried to really justify it because I knew Radha was going to ask me why I did it. Like, she doesn't love coverage. She doesn't love, what I mean is like, she doesn't love cutting in coverage, right? She doesn't love disrupting the narrative in that way. And so I wanted to give her the space to see her vision, presented in the way she saw it in her head, which was like a long single take if I felt like it would play that way. But then, when I would be given the footage, there are certain things that just need to be cut in a certain way that just like, or like, this isn't the approach that she always would take, but like sometimes she would shoot coverage, or sometimes the scene would have 6 or 8 people, or sometimes the scene like in Arlene's Grocery where you'd have like wide shots and reverses and like profiles and big, and masters and things got a little unruly that way. Or like, Queens of the Ring, where you would have inside of the ring and outside of the ring and, the audience members and Radha and Dee, like you had a lot to play with. And so she and Eric Bronco, this DP, took a real direct, controlled approach to the choices they would make. Like, often the choice was just apparent by reviewing the footage that she would want to sit in the shot. Like, I would just watch the footage and just say, like, she wants to sit in this take. Like, this take is working. There's no there, sometimes I would get coverage just in case, but like it was so clear that like, this is just a way to cover your ass, as they say, right? Like, generally speaking, I think that's part of the reason that I think she thought we would work well together, is because we had already been aligned on not cutting, if that's possible. And I don't really see the role of an editor as being the person who can make the most cuts. I see the role as a sort of the first audience, where you can help a director like bring out the best version of their film by responding to it with whatever their intention is, like finding their intention and making sure that it's coming across on screen.
That's an interesting point that you make about not shooting as much coverage, because I remember speaking to one director on my show, Matt Walker, and when they first started out, they didn't actually shoot that much coverage, so they had to somehow work with it in the edit. And it's great when it sort of pulls off, and as it has on this film as well, with letting the story play out, and where you see the cut being made,
Yeah,
because it does. It's nice. It does. It did. I did have that Woody Allen feel of like Manhattan and Annie Hall,
yeah,
of letting the scene play out, letting the actors basically flex their muscles on screen.
yeah.
And as well, like the cast is great. It is one of those sort of human stories that you get lost in. It is a coming of age story for someone in their 40s, coming up to their 40s.
Hmm.
It's great to hear as well how the sort of process is created, from understanding what the director's vision is
Hmm.
and getting that across. So you kind of stole the answer to one of my questions that I was going to ask next, but hopefully we can wheel some gold from it anyway. And I'm going to ask it anyway because I feel like I might miss out on something. But when you do have these longer takes, does it make it easier for you as an editor, or does it make it harder knowing that you're not going to be cutting back and forth from an over shoulder shot or a mid shot and so on?
Well, I mean, I think every decision has to be justified, and the question I would always ask myself when I was looking at the footage is this the right approach? Like, obviously, I know Rada's preferences, but like being the first audience for the film, you have to try to make sure that you're telling the story in the best way. And so I think that I was always trying to justify it to myself. And so the work continues, whether you're actually physically editing or not. But that said, even in those long takes, there are hidden edits and tricks we're employing to try and stitch together the best moments from different scenes to try and from different takes to try and make an amalgamated version of it where we maintain this feeling that we haven't cut, but we're actually switching back and forth. So there are moments like in the play rehearsal scene, where the black couple is up there and they're trying to ask Rada to justify why the woman is talking a certain way, and Rada is getting this feeling of realizing that she has distorted, the true meaning of her play. It always, like, we have probably hidden maybe twice as many edits than are visible in the scene to try and give us the best flexibility to capture the right performance. I mean, when we're choosing to cut because that was the right performance. But if it was possible to hide it in the swing, we were doing that. And then I can't guarantee that every scene that has a swing in it has an edit in it, but I would say that every scene that has a swing in it, you know what I mean when I say swing, right? Where the camera's swinging back and forth, right?
Yes.
Like every scene that has a swing in it, we tried to put an edit in there. We talked about it. So it was always about trying to stitch together the best moments, because I think we wanted to do justice and do right by the attempt and feel that Rada and the production team had decided on when they were shooting it. But that doesn't mean we can't, pull a few rabbits out of a hat in the process of it. I wanted to pull out all the tricks. We're always working. I think to answer your question is, like, the brain doesn't turn off just because there's less edits in the scene. We're always just trying to find the right balance. And in some places, let me also just, add one other thing to it. There are some moments in the scene in the film where we jump cut. And I think we were trying to find a way to up the energy in those scenes, or trying to find a way to communicate. With limited footage, we always wanted to try to experiment. And so we found places to work jump cuts. So even when there isn't coverage and we wanted to inject some energy into the film, like one of the first scene outside the school where she's on the phone with Archie and she's like frantic and like she's just, broken up this fight with her students, and she's like all in her own head about her career. And it's like there are jump cuts in there. And then when she gets out of Queens in the Ring and she's singing in the car with Dee, we put all these jump cuts in there about like her, being like, oh my God, I can't believe it just happened. Oh my God. Because we felt like it communicated exactly the right kinds of emotions coming from Rada in that moment. And so, we would never just cut to cut, but we were, where it felt like it was enhancing the film, we went with a little bit more of a visible editing approach than a lot of these other sort of invisible edits that I was talking about.
Cool to hear as well, where you did sneak in some edits, and I'm gonna go back to watch some of those longer scenes and to see if you can see if there is a little edit or something that might have popped up.
Let me know. I'll try and answer your question.
I probably will miss it, just knowing me. It's just It's just one of those things, though, as well. I guess if it's done seamlessly and you don't notice it, then it's in the hands of a good editor, and they know
I think
how
it's
to
one of those things. Thank you. I think I was just gonna say, like, I think it's funny. The more time I spend working and the more movies I work on, the more I kind of see that the real truth is that the audience gives themselves over to the story almost completely, and that, like, for sort of the same reasons that a lot of editors say, like, continuity isn't actually as important as you think. Like, that I think if you're telling the story with the right emotions and with the right rhythm, and you're conveying the right story beats in the right ways, that, like, the audience doesn't always respond to like a jump cut, or oh, that cup was in their right hand and now it's in their left hand, like those kinds of things. If you're looking for those moments in the story, you're not doing your work. Like, I'm sorry, let me put that a different way. If the audience is finding those moments, then you haven't done your job. The point, or the goal of the filmmaking process, is to keep your audience engaged in a way so that if that becomes a necessity, if you have to have one of these like continuity breaks or something like that, that your audience doesn't notice because they're so enraptured in the story. I mean, if you just watch a lot of action sequences, you'll see repeated story beats all the time, double punches and, like, cars flipping over and over again. And it's like, yes, technically that's duplicated information, but at the same time, you're so wrapped up in the emotion of the moment that you're not paying attention. And I think that just like that just shows that I think you have more freedom in the editing room than on paper you should.
I like that answer. I like that sort of, because I know I mentioned this before in another episode, but even the editing process is where pretty much the whole film comes together. Even though you have everything shot and stuff written, but this is where the sort of clay is put in the mold, and everything's kind of set in stone, basically, which is cool to hear and to see. I guess this is more just a question, because the next few are more they are related to the film, but also I guess more opinion based, because this is Rada's directorial debut, feature film directorial debut, and it's very strong for a first film. And I guess what I've been noticing, maybe 10 years, maybe a little bit more, is that there's directors' debuts are becoming a lot more stronger, and they're being introduced more to a wider audience, and people are sort of connecting more. Now, why do you think it is that, like, this is happening?
Well, I think that is a good question. I think to some degree that time and cinema history has put more pressure on filmmakers from that way to be these fully formed, fully baked filmmakers right out of the gate. So I think from just beginning your question from the end, let's say that there's an audience's expectation, especially when you are being sold a film through a marketing or whatever, as a first-time filmmaker, you're putting a lot of pressure on that. Now, like, you're putting a lot of pressure on those filmmakers to execute, and so that creates the need for those filmmakers to turn around and be as prepared as possible. And fortunately, now with, the democratization of production, it being easier than ever to go out and shoot and experiment with your ideas. Also, the democratization of distribution in a lot of ways. It's easier than ever to put your vision in front of people. Like, it's really easy to go out and shoot something on your iPhone and then upload it to YouTube and get a bunch of clicks and likes. And like, it's very easy to get an audience response, and so it's very easy to test that, to test your vision. And it's also very easy to learn. I mean, Rada didn't come through the traditional film school, NYU, USC, sort of American sort of breeding ground of cinemaphiles. And so, she's just a cinemaphile because her mother was a cinemaphile and exposed her to a lot of great art when she was young and impressionable. And that carried through her circuitous journey as a playwright and teaching and doing all these things, getting the life experience to write this film. And so I think Rada's had a long journey, but I think Rada has looked at everything as practice. And so I think that when she made the decision to make this into a film, she made the decision to, as closely as possible, be sure in her decisions and be clear in her decisions, and then also to bring on team members that helped her execute those visions. And I really credit the entire production team, and specifically Eric Bronco, her DP, for helping bring those decisions out of her. And look, I think that getting opportunities to experiment with her thought process and experiment with her approach at places like the Sundance Labs were really helpful. And I think that that's also part of what, that she gave herself the freedom to experiment, but I wouldn't say anything showed up on screen for the first time without it being considered. And as long as I think the world expects that of first-time filmmakers, fortunately, unfortunately, but I think Rada expects that of herself. And I think that Rada, if anything, is prepared for the work that she wants to do. And, I think that she tries to she really wants to present a fully formed vision of her film. And so that gives her the, that made her really work before she decided to make this film. I wouldn't say that she didn't go into this blindly.
Good answer. You're right that it's become so easily accessible now to make projects. You can literally take your iPhone out and go shoot something in the park, and it won't necessarily be good, but you can, as you said, experiment, see what works, see what doesn't work, and really sort of find your voice. And you are it is crazy to think how many first-time directors are coming out with home runs that people consider them as classics already. And it's just, I don't know, it's really hard to get my mind wrapped around it, because you compare it to somebody who might have made debut 40 or 50 years ago, and it's completely different. The sort of style and the story that they're telling. This kind of leads to my final question to wrap this up. What's next for you?
So what's next for me is I am about to start on an HBO pilot, and I can't talk too much about it, but what I can say is that it's with the other director I worked with at the Sundance Labs. It is an adaptation of some short films that he made before he went to the labs. And there's some information about it on the internet, but outside of that, I have to keep quiet about it. But it should be a really fun project, and we're hoping HBO likes it, and we'll find out, because they start shooting at the end of the week. And wow. I think it's really been kind of great to be able to see all this response. The pandemic is a funny way to debut what might be the most important project of my career in a lot of ways. And so it's been really rewarding to see how I can still talk to people about it and communicate about it over things like Zoom, over, through any kind of meeting or discussion that happens digitally without having to leave your house. And so it's been a really fun few months since the film came out, and the whole thing is kind of surreal because this isn't that we're all sort of trapped in our houses. But like, I'm really thankful that the film got a strong release from Netflix, and grateful for all the awards that Radha has been credited with. Tonight there is a Zoom where there's a virtual celebration of her. Sundance is giving her the Vanguard Award, which is another really prestigious award that they only give to one filmmaker a year. And like, I'm really sort of looking forward to that. And like, I think I'm just really lucky to be part of this. And what I hope is next for me, as far as this film goes, is I just get to keep watching it, keep having an impact, keep watching people respond to it, keep watching people find strong, like, emotional messaging in the film and be interested in it. And, hoping that people I'm hoping the film continues to have an impact, because it is so hard to feel that in the modern environment. I can't go to the theater and watch people watch it. I have to kind of just continue to trust that it's out there in the world. If only Netflix would release their numbers. Just kidding.
I guess finding a positive in a pandemic is it's come out at a perfect time where so many people are stuck at home, so they can, and they're yearning for new content. So it kind of drops at the perfect time.
Yeah.
But I guess you also miss the community feel of seeing something like this in the cinema and just seeing people's reactions to certain beats, because you probably know the film inside out and like the back of your hand. And then you'll know that there'll be certain moments that will hit and you'll see people's reactions and you'll be like, yes, like mission accomplished, basically.
Can I tell a quick story about that?
Yeah, go on.
While we're talking about it? Yeah. So, obviously we had all hoped to have a big premiere when Netflix acquired the film out of Sundance. And like, I did get a lot of that audience reaction at Sundance, and it was so great to have it. I feel so blessed to have the start of my 2020 be, rooms filled with crowded people watching my film. But then, when the film was going to get released in October, it became really tough to have something like a premiere. And so what Netflix helped organize was a drive-in screening at the Queens Drive-In in New York City. And we all drove our cars in, and all the cast and crew were there, and everybody was socially distanced. And but Netflix really put on this great event, and I got to see the film in a way I'd never seen it before, both from the comfort of my own car, and then I also got to watch the audience respond to some of these moments in the film by honking their horn. And so if there were big like laughs or big emotional achievements in the film, like at the end of Poverty Porn, like everyone just started honking. And it was like, I had never seen that before. And I'm kind of getting like chills thinking about it, because it was obviously, this pandemic has been really hard for a lot of people, and it's been really strange and surreal. And I don't expect to have any kind of sort of emotional group reaction in something like a drive-in theater or anything like that. You know what I mean? I just didn't expect to get any kind of satisfaction that way. But then to hear cars like, flashing their lights and honking their horns in response to the film just brought like a whole new type of screening experience that I'd never seen before, never felt before. And to have that like with your film was like just, incredible. So, I still feel incredibly grateful and lucky.
No, that's a nice story though. That's a nice sort of way to end it, on that sort of story. And I'd just like to say, Rob, thank you very much for joining me today and talking about the 40-odd version, which is streaming now on Netflix. So if you haven't seen it and you listened to the whole episode, sorry that we spoiled everything. But please make sure you check it out, because it is a really good film. It is a change of pace to what's happening now, and it's a change of pace from other content out there, and it's just a good palate cleanser and a good human story.
Thank you, Rob. That's really nice of you to say, and I really appreciate you having me on your show. And like, I really feel grateful to be part of the project, and then today get that opportunity to talk to people like you and get to unpack it further. So thank you.
Rob, thank you again. Take care.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me, man.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.